Hey guys, it's Christy and welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me. Today we're going to be reviewing the new Artist Couture Supreme Mauves palette. So before we get into it, I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel before you leave. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy, and let's get into it. Alright guys, so today we're going to be talking about the new Artist Couture Supreme Mauves palette. So I did mention this was the last piece of my final Sephora haul. This one just kind of got shipped separately and it took forever to come in, but now we have it. So this is the outer box. This is made in the US and has a 12-month shelf life. So this is my very first Artist Couture palette. So I'm very curious about this. So here is the inner packaging. Excuse my fingerprints. This is a very beautiful, sleek black palette. Very pretty. I really like the aesthetic of this palette. And I've seen some of his other palettes and I've been tempted to pick them up, but I've just never taken the leap. But this one, of course, got my attention with the rosy tones. So very beautiful, very sleek. It's also magnetic on the inside, which I think is really nice. So here is the inside of the palette. So you do have 12 shades in here with a mix of neutrals and rosy mauve tones. I don't feel like this is the most mauve palette. If you were to ask me, I would say the retro palette from Natasha Denona. That has way more of a mauve vibe in my opinion, but I still think this is beautiful. So this palette is described as a must-have eyeshadow and pressed pigment palette made up of 12 richly pigmented modern mauve shades and 3 different finishes to create endless looks. So again, like I mentioned, this is my very first Artist Couture palette, so I am not at all familiar with the formula. I really don't know what to expect. This is a pricier palette. This does retail for $56 Canadian, so around the $40 mark US. The only thing I've tried from Artist Couture is their loose highlights, which were really pretty, but also really messy. Let's get into looking at some swatches of the palette. The first shade is Overexposed, which is described as a matte porcelain rose. This is a shade I can definitely see myself using to set down my eye primer. Okay, the next shade is Risque, which is a sparkling pink champagne. And this is really pretty. I feel like it doesn't have a ton of base to it. I feel like it's going to be more of like a sparkly topper shade. Okay, then we have Provocative, which is a matte taupe mauve. Not swatching the very best. I'm not super impressed with the swatches, but that's okay. The swatches don't tell the whole story. Then we have Strip Down, which is really pretty. And one thing I'm noticing about these shimmers is they're not very smooth. They feel very dry in the pan. So again, this is Strip Down, which is a sparkling mauve. Next we have Kinky, which is a matte light brown mauve. And I'm not really seeing the mauve in these brownie tone shades. That could just be me. Lust is a matte mauve. Then we have Audacious, which is a matte caramel berry. That's a pretty shade. Yeah, that's a pretty shade. I like that one. I know it's a basic brown, but it's quite nice. And then we have, ooh, that's pretty. Okay, then we have Obscene, which is a sparkling duochrome cranberry violet. That's pretty. Okay, that's gonna have to go on the eyes. That wasn't one I had my eye on for today's look, but it is now. Then we have Royale, which is a matte taffy mauve. Ooh, that's also pretty. All right. Okay, so far, a lot more impressed with the bottom row. Then we have Sex Appeal, which is a sparkling duochrome pink magenta. Oh, well that's pretty too. Okay, then we have Seductress, which is a sparkling purple. Also very pretty. Finally, we have Prestige, which is a matte deep plum. Okay, so that is a deeper shade. It did not go very far for me, but that made it worse. But that is the color story. Very pretty. I'm quite impressed with the color story. I really wasn't impressed with the first few shades, and then the last half of the palette. Very beautiful. Okay guys, so I think I'm going to start with Overexposed. I'm just going to kind of work that one through the crease. I don't really need to. I feel like it's so light. It's more of the type of shade. Oh, okay, I'm getting a ton of kick up with that first shade. So yeah, this is more of a shade that I would use to set down my eye primer, but at the same time I really want to try to use all of the shades that I can in this palette. So I'm just really just working that one in the crease. I guess I am getting a little bit of color payoff from that. Okay, I think I'm going to really try to deepen that crease with the shade Lust. This one is also giving me quite a bit of kick up. So just know that if that's something that bothers you, you may not like this palette. That's a really pretty crease shade. So I do think the mattes in this palette are behaving pretty well so far. They do, the two that I've tried so far definitely have a lot of kick up, but they're performing quite well on the eyes. So I'm going to go now into Royale, and I'm just working this shade onto the outer corner. Shades that have a ton of kick up do tend to be very blendable. That's not something that bothers me, but I know it really bothers some people. But these mattes are working together quite nicely. They are blending out really well on the lid. So I definitely don't have any complaints so far. The shade Royale really isn't as pigmented as I thought it would be. I like that. I do. I do want to, I think I'm going to go into Prestige. On the outer corner, I wasn't going to, but for the sake of the review and for testing out as many shades as I can, I think we're going to do it. Okay. That one's being a little more difficult to blend. Okay, so the shade Prestige, this darker plummy purple, is definitely giving me a harder time blending. Okay, so I'm just going in with a really light hand on this eye, and that seems to be helping the situation. It appears I just put on way too much on this side right away, and I should have built it up. Okay, I think that's the best I'm gonna get with this one. So that shade Prestige, definitely more difficult to work with. I think now I'm going to put Overexposed all over the lid. I'm just going to go back into that quickly and just smooth it over the lid. Okay, I think I'm going to take Sex Appeal, and I'm going to take that all over the center of the lid. I'm going to go in with the finger. That's just my favorite way to do metallics. I don't feel like I'm getting the very best color payoff. Let's go in with a brush, which I very rarely do, so I'm kind of intrigued. Okay, so the wet brush is definitely doing more than a finger, which is fine. With a little bit of building, you can get it to look really nice. Now I think I'm going to take a smaller brush, and I'm going to go into Strip Down on the inner portion. Okay, there we go. There's some color. Okay, let's try this one with the finger then. Okay, this one works best with a finger. All right. Okay, I'm just going to take a shader brush, and I'm just going to take Seductress. I'm just going to see if I can use that to kind of meld that into that outer corner shade. Alright, so I think that is the best we're gonna get. I am not in love with this look, but let me pop off camera, finish up the rest of my makeup, and I will be right back with my final thoughts. Alright guys, so here is the final look. This is still just not my favorite look I've ever created. I definitely had some issues with some of the shades, but let's talk about these. Okay, so again, I think the packaging is stunning. Getting into these, I think the mattes are really nice. I think the mattes in this palette work really well together. Again, there is quite a bit of kick up, so if that's something that bothers you, you may not love that, but I do think overall the mattes are the strongest point. These shimmers are very interesting. So I tried to play with as many shades as I possibly could. I decided to, so as we saw, I took Sex Appeal and I just went all over the lid with that. Initially, I only had it in the center, but I ended up going all over the lid because I took Strip Down on the inner portion. So Sex Appeal initially worked way better with a wet brush. So I thought Strip Down might do the same thing. Strip Down did not play nice with a wet brush. Strip Down required a finger, and then I just really didn't like it on the lid so much, so I just covered everything up with Sex Appeal. And then I used a Seductress to kind of help it blend into the outer corner shade, that Prestige shade. And I liked it quite a bit better, and so that definitely helped. I will say I was kind of surprised because I feel like these 3 shades swatched beautifully. Yeah, I felt like the bottom part of the palette swatched the best, and I was the most impressed with that, but that's the part that gave me the hardest time actually trying to work with it. I found that Prestige, so all the other mattes work well. Prestige actually gave me a bit of a hard time, which is fairly common with purples, but this one was a little bit difficult. So I would recommend, if you use Prestige, definitely go in with a very light hand. Prestige isn't my favorite shade, but I think the one shade in here that is just not so great is Strip Down. I really don't like that shade. I didn't like the way it applied to the lid, and I really didn't like how I really had to work to get it to do anything. I will say Sex Appeal did beautifully with a wet brush, but then after that I was able to build with a finger. So I found that interesting. Yeah, I'm still really intrigued by the shade Obscene. I think it's beautiful. I meant to use it today, but I ended up going a little more purple. Yeah, so overall, I think this is a nice palette. I think it's really pretty. I think the mattes are solid. I think the shimmers aren't my favorite shimmer formula. I think they're a bit on the dry side. I don't know if that's common for the brand, but they do feel a little bit on the dry side. So for some of the shades, I would recommend using a wet brush. They perform okay with a finger, but much better with a wet brush. So that's kind of my only critique, and the fact that Prestige is kind of a more difficult shade to blend. I don't like that. Overall, the palette is pretty good. The pigment is pretty good. It's easy to use. I really like these lighter mattes. I think they're beautiful. I'm definitely still very excited to try Obscene because it swatched beautifully. Overall, I like most of these shades. It's just there is a couple of not so great shades in the palette. So yeah, I don't know. I am still interested to try more from the brand, and I'm definitely curious if the drier shimmers are kind of common to this line. So overall, I think it's nice. It's not my most favorite palette in my collection, but it's not the worst I have either, and I'll definitely keep playing with it and enjoying it. As far as comparisons go, I don't think this is the most mauve palette there is. I would give that to the Natasha Denona Retro. They're not identical by any means, but I would say if you're really into the mauve, I would definitely go with the Natasha Denona. It is more pricey, but you get a lot more shades, and the formula is quite superior. Not that the formula on this one is bad, it's just, it's not this. And then to compare to the most recent Rosy palette that came out, which was the Patrick Ta Major Dimension 2 Rose palette, I would say the Artist Couture has some brighter shades in it, just some brighter pinks, but I would say that the quality of the Patrick Ta is, just like the Natasha Denona, far superior to the Artist Couture. However, the Patrick Ta is also very pricey. So this one is still pricey, but less so than the Natasha Denona or the Patrick Ta. But those two are superior in quality. This is not terrible quality. It's just not, it's not the best I've used. It's also not the worst. So that's kind of where I land on that one. I'm kind of disappointed. I had hoped that I would love it much more than I do. I still think the packaging is beautiful. I'm definitely still going to use it quite a bit. I really enjoy the color story. I think that's very pretty. I just have some better formulas in my collection. Again, it's not terrible. I have some terrible formulas in my collection, and this is not terrible. It's just not my favorite. So overall, pretty palette, just not my favorite formula. But that is it for me today. I hope this video was helpful if you've been debating on picking up this palette, but let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you so very much for watching. I appreciate it so, so much. If you're new here, I hope you'll consider subscribing before you go. I do upload at least 3 new videos every single week. And that's it for me today. Thank you again so very much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!